A slap echoes to the federal building lobby as two arrogant security guards strike a quiet elderly man in worn clothes. They smirk, thinking it's just another power trip. What they don't know, he's James Winters, Medal of Honor recipient. In minutes, their carefully constructed empire will crumble to dust. Houston, Texas, a city where gleaming skyscrapers stand alongside struggling neighborhoods, where Southern hospitality often masks deep-rooted prejudice. James Winters arrived at the federal building just after 8 a.m., the Gulf Coast humidity already hanging heavy in the air. At 68, his once powerful frame now bent slightly forward, whether by age and the lingering effect of injuries sustained in Vietnam 5 decades earlier. His thinning white hair was neatly combed, his clothes modest but clean. Faded jeans, a simple button-down shirt, and a worn leather jacket despite the heat. As one of the few surviving Medal of Honor recipients from the Vietnam War, James had faced death with extraordinary courage. During an ambush that killed half his platoon, he carried 3 wounded men to safety while wounded himself, then returned to hold off enemy forces alone for 4 hours until evacuation arrived. But today wasn't about war stories. He was here for Thomas, a young Afghanistan veteran facing benefit denial after a confrontation with building security last month. Something about his case felt wrong, and James trusted his instincts. They'd saved lives before. James slipped into the federal building wearing no military insignia, no pins, no patches, nothing to indicate his service. Just another aging veteran navigating bureaucracy. He chose a seat in the waiting area, close enough to observe but not to intrude. Security guards Sean Reynolds and Marcus Tate stood near the reception desk, their postures radiating the casual arrogance of men drunk on minor authority. James had heard whispers about them, veterans harassed, benefit applicants intimidated, complaints that mysteriously disappeared. Thomas sat nervously on a plastic chair, eyes downcast, discharge papers clutched tightly. When Tate roughly grabbed his arm during a document check, James's jaw tightened. "Is that necessary?" he asked, voice soft but carrying the natural authority of someone who once commanded men in battle. Reynolds's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" "The young man is cooperating," James said. "There's no need for rough handling." Tate stepped closer, towering over James's seated form. "Who exactly are you, old-timer?" "Just try to help a fellow veteran," James answered quietly. Reynolds laughed sharply. Another one who thinks service means special treatment. When James slowly stood, wincing slightly from his arthritic hip, Reynolds's face darkened. "Sit down before you hurt yourself, Grandpa. These young men deserve respect," James insisted. "They've earned it." The slap came without warning, an open palm across his weathered face that echoed through the suddenly silent lobby. "Respect is earned here," Reynolds sneered. "Not given to every old fool who walks in complaining." James barely moved with the impact. A red mark bloomed across his cheekbone, but his eyes, they burned with a calm intensity that made Reynolds step back involuntarily. The lobby froze in collective shock. Several people instinctively reached for phones. A receptionist stood, mouth open in horror. "Did you just assault a civilian in a federal building, Mr. Reynolds?" James asked, his voice carrying surprising strength. Reynolds smirked. "You were interfering with security procedures." "Was I?" James reached slowly into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. He flipped it open, revealing a government ID with presidential seal. James Winters, Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, Vietnam, 1971. 47 years of service to Veterans Affairs. The color drained from Reynolds' face. Tate's hand instinctively moved to his partner's arm. "That's impossible," Reynolds stammered. "You're not." "Not what?" James's voice hardened. "Not in uniform? Not what you expected. Or not someone you thought would have the authority to report you." The building's head of security rushed forward, her expression grave. "Mr. Winters, I'm deeply sorry. Would you like to file a formal complaint?" "I would." James turned to address the room. "And I believe several people here witnessed what happened." Phones were already recording. A receptionist nodded vigorously. "This is ridiculous," Tate interjected. "It was a misunderstanding." he was interfering with. I was questioning unnecessary force, James corrected. Something your team has a documented history of using against veterans. But today, that changes. The security director's face paled. Documented history? James nodded slowly. I didn't come here by accident today. Within minutes, the building administrator arrived, profusely apologizing. Reynolds and Tate were immediately pulled aside, their faces showing the first flickers of genuine concern. We'll need to take your statement, Mr. Winters, the administrator said. I'll give it, James replied. But first, I need to make a call. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. Colonel Hayes? It's Winters. They took the bait. Bring everything. This meeting will come to order, announced the federal building's regional director, his face grave as he surveyed the hastily assembled group in the conference room. When James returned an hour later, the atmosphere had shifted like air before a thunderstorm. He wore his dress uniform now, crisp and perfectly maintained despite its age. The Medal of Honor hung from a blue ribbon around his neck, gleaming alongside rows of other decorations that told the story of extraordinary service. He wasn't alone. Behind him walked Colonel Richard Hayes, Senior Director of the Veterans Affairs Office, and a sharp-eyed woman who immediately approached the administrator. Agent Sarah Blackwood, Department of Defense Investigative Service. She said, "Credentials extended. I'm here to formally present these findings." Reynolds and Tate sat at the far end of the table, their security badges already confiscated, as Blackwood handed over a thick folder. "What is this?" the regional director asked, flipping through the pages. "Evidence of a pattern, sir," James said, stepping forward. "For 2 years, veterans have reported mistreatment at this facility. Intimidation, harassment, denial of services without cause." Reynolds stood abruptly. "That's a damn lie." "Sit down," the director ordered sharply. James continued, unflinching. Veterans with PTSD were deliberately triggered by these guards. Those with visible disabilities were subjected to unnecessary searches. Those questioning procedures were threatened with benefit denial. Colonel Hayes stepped forward. "We've tried addressing this through proper channels. Every complaint disappeared. Every witness was pressured to withdraw statements. Until today," James said, his eyes locked on Reynolds. "Because today, you picked the wrong person to slap." Agent Blackwood activated a digital display showing security footage. Dozens of clips of Reynolds and Tate harassing veterans, mocking disabilities, creating unnecessary delays for those needing urgent care. "This isn't just about 2 guards, Blackwood explained, pulling up a network diagram. "We've identified a systematic problem that extends to supervisory levels." The diagram showed connections between Reynolds, Tate, and 4 other security personnel, all reporting to Security Chief William Porter, a man known for cutting corners and intimidating complainants. Porter deliberately buried complaints. Blackwood continued. Evidence disappeared. Veterans who spoke up found their benefits mysteriously delayed or denied. A young veteran stepped forward from the back of the room. "That's what happened to me," he said, voice shaking. "I reported them for mocking my prosthetic leg last month. Next day, my disability claim was flagged for further review." His testimony broke the dam. 3 more veterans came forward, then a clerk, then a janitor, each with stories of abuse witnessed and silenced. The threats began that night. First, a brick through James's living room window with a note, "Should have stayed quiet, old man." Then anonymous calls. By morning, his mailbox had been smashed, and someone had spray-painted "Traitor" across his garage door. "You should stay somewhere else for a while," Colonel Hayes suggested during their emergency meeting. James shook his head. "If I run, everyone who came forward yesterday will think twice about standing their ground." The veterans community rallied around him. Members of his old unit took shifts watching his house. The local VFW post sent volunteers to escort him to meetings. When word spread about the intimidation, something unexpected happened. The community responded. Mrs. Garcia, whose son James had mentored through PTSD last year, organized neighbors to clean the graffiti. Active duty soldiers from nearby Fort Hood stood guard in uniform. Local businesses donated security cameras. Meanwhile, the media storm intensified. What began as a local story about security guard misconduct had exploded into national headlines. Medal of Honor recipient exposes systematic abuse of veterans with single act of courage. James's phone rang constantly with interview requests, but he declined them all. This wasn't about becoming a celebrity. It was about accountability. The resistance grew more desperate. An anonymous letter to the VA claimed James had falsified his service record. A fake social media account appeared, posting doctor photos suggesting he was mentally unstable. Someone filed a complaint alleging he'd threatened security personnel before the incident. "They're trying to destroy your credibility," Agent Blackwood warned during protection detail. James's expression remained resolute. "They can try, but there's a difference between me and them." He looked out the window at the gathering of veterans outside his home, some in wheelchairs, others with prosthetic limbs, all standing guard. "I'm not standing alone." That evening, a convoy of motorcycles roared up to his house. The Patriot Guard riders, leather-clad veterans forming a protective circle around his property. Their leader, a grizzled Vietnam vet like himself, nodded silently to James. No words needed. The federal hearing room was packed beyond capacity. Journalists squeezed into every available space. Photographers jostled for position, and a line of veterans wrapped around the block, many in uniform, many with visible wounds of war. At the government table, Agent Blackwood arranged her notes with methodical precision. Across the aisle, a team of lawyers surrounded Reynolds, Tate, and Porter, who sat stone-faced in suits that couldn't hide what they truly were. James took the stand, the fluorescent lights highlighting the determination in his eyes. The red mark on his face had faded, but its impact had only grown stronger. "Mr. Winters," began the hearing officer, "please tell us what happened that day." James recounted the events clearly, his voice steady. When he described the slap, several panel members visibly flinched. "And why did you decide to come forward with the additional evidence?" James looked directly at the guards. "Because that slap wasn't about me. It was about power. It was about who they thought could be silenced and who couldn't." He gestured toward the gallery, where dozens of veterans sat. Every one of these men and women faced the same treatment. The difference is when they complained, no one listened. When I complained, people had to listen, not because what happened to me was worse, but because of this. He touched the Medal of Honor at his neck. "This medal doesn't make my pain more important than theirs. It just makes it harder to ignore." The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, his strategy clear: attack his credibility, question his motives. "Isn't it true you orchestrated this confrontation, Mr. Winters? That you went there looking for trouble?" "I went there looking for truth," James replied. "After 30 veterans reported similar treatment and nothing changed. You've enjoyed the attention, haven't you? The hero veteran?" James leaned forward. "Son, I've been shot at, blown up, and left for dead in a jungle halfway around the world. There's nothing enjoyable about watching fellow veterans, men and women who sacrificed everything for this country, being treated like garbage by people paid to serve them." The room fell silent. "I didn't want attention," James continued. "I wanted the same thing I fought for 50 years ago, for people to be treated with dignity." 3 months later, James sat on his porch, watching neighborhood children play across the street. The morning news had reported the final outcomes. Reynolds and Tate permanently barred from security work. Porter facing federal charges for falsifying reports. A complete overhaul of the federal building security protocols. And a new Veterans Advocacy Office established on-site. Thomas, the young veteran whose case had first brought James to the building, sat beside him, his benefits finally approved. "They're calling you a hero again, sir," Thomas said, gesturing to the newspaper on the table. James shook his head. "I just did what needed doing. Same as any day in Vietnam." Later, alone with his thoughts, James touched the spot where the slap had landed. That moment of pain had created ripples of change throughout the system. One act of courage had inspired others to find their own. This isn't just a story about security guards facing consequences. It's about what happens when those who serve refuse to be forgotten, when respect isn't just a word but an action. Sometimes the most powerful act isn't charging an enemy position. It's standing your ground when the battle comes to you on home soil. The phone rang. The VA secretary himself, calling to ask James to serve on a new national committee for veterans treatment reform. Yes, James said simply. I'll serve. Some missions, he knew, never really end. When James Winters walked into that federal building, he wasn't looking for a fight. He was simply refusing to look away, refusing to accept that those who serve their country should be treated with anything less than dignity. His story reminds us that respect isn't about age, appearance, or even rank. It's about recognizing the humanity in each person we encounter, regardless of how they look or what we assume about them. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you appeared? Have you witnessed someone being mistreated based on assumptions? What did you do? The courage to stand up doesn't always mean wearing a uniform or medal. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be silent when you witness injustice. James didn't set out to be a hero twice in one lifetime. He simply lived by the same code that earned him the Medal of Honor in the first place, doing what's right, even when it's hard, even when you stand alone. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Has someone ever misjudged you based on your appearance? How did you respond? If this veteran's quiet courage inspired you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of everyday heroes who remind us that true respect is earned through actions, not appearances.